got up next, Bill Gardner, and his theme is our presentation, Making Our Profession More Professional. Let's hear it for Bill. So whenever I sit down, it's like slip and slide. I'm sorry. Did I hurt you or move back around back here? Just on the couches. So, thanks for having me back again this year. This is me. I love this picture because it's so ridiculous. It's photoshopped, of course. My very good friend Chris Lett took this photo for a project I was working on, but it came out in So Glamour magazine. I made sure I kept it. My name is Bill. I work at Marshall University, but everything I say today is not the opinions of Marshall University. And they say to take this trip, but I'm not here representing them, but I did use their slides. So, disclaimer. Thanks for having me back. And this year is my second year at Bsides Asheville. Love Asheville. Actually, my grandmother's family is from the Asheville area, so I get to come back and go down memory lane. If you're in town, you're not from here, please go to the billboard. It's amazing. It's an amazing attraction. There's a lot of things to do here in Asheville. Please check out all the touristy stuff. It's great fun. I poured a Coke, got a Coke on my keyboard 24 hours before I got ready to come to this conference. And somebody kept putting off doing the presentation. So I did this last night. So I hope the presentation guys were with me and I didn't misspell anything. I am dyslexic, so that's part of the problem. I teach digital forensics and information assurance at Marshall, and that's my main job. I like to call it Defense Against the Dark Arts, just because, well, it's more interesting to say that I teach in integrated science and technology and ecology of science. I wrote this book with Valerie, and it's still out there, never priced, but you can kind of get deals on it if you look around. It's about an integration security awareness program. Everyone says that you need one, but no one tells you how to do it. And the idea behind this book was to tell you how to do it, and then how to test it. So we tell you how. It's very straightforward. It's written for non-technical people. It was a lot of fun to write. Right now, I'm in the process of revising Google Hacking with Johnny Long and Justin Brown, which should be out in August or September. I want to thank Dan Kevin for writing words for my book. We're going to name drop a little bit, right? They wrote very good words for the book, and soon both great friends. Network Scout is a project that my students are doing. I took 2 undergraduate students who volunteered full time. I had an idea for a network device that ran on a Raspberry Pi. You plugged it inside your network on each physical or logical segment of your LAN. Then it would monitor your inside your network for nefarious traffic. So Marcus was talking earlier about pivots. If you get a social engineer and then your infection attempts to pivot, basically what we'll do is Network Scout will catch that and then alert you to it. You should never see any track on your Network Scout box. But we kind of ripped off Johnny Long and his Rachel Pi. So it's a Raspberry Pi inside of a Pelican case. So it's water and dust resistant. And then, back to another slide. Scout. They're actually the 2 students who did this. We did this just last year at DerbyCon. They're teaching a class on how to build it. It's sold out at DerbyCon, how to build your own Network Scout, how to set it up, which is pretty cool. These guys are undergraduates. Sean is now graduated. He's looking for a job. He's one of my most talented students. He taught himself Python and really picked up this project and moved forward. He's also volunteered his time to teach grade school students Python in his spare time. If you're hiring, both of these kids are looking for a job. This is my podcast I do. One of the things I'll talk about today is how we as security practitioners need to start talking to people outside of our community outside of the bubble. And this is an attempt to do that. So if you want to be on Reboot It, let me know. But I call Reboot It a security podcast that my mother could listen to. So we don't do a lot of talking about locker room jokes. Don't talk a lot about cigars or drinking. Nothing against other people who do, but we're not your average podcast. So please check it out. So what's a profession? A profession is an occupation that involves prolonged training and formal qualification. Is InfoSec a profession based upon this definition? It could be. I think it's becoming that. And I think we're moving from, I hate to use the word paradigm. Next thing I'll be talking about thought leaders. But we're moving from one, we're going to get to cyber later, drink. Wait a minute, I can't say cyber and then tell you to drink, can I? Drink. We're moving from a time where, hackers, I self-identify as a hacker. People who work in InfoSec have become more self-taught. I was a system administrator for 20 years. I have degrees in political science and journalism, which makes me perfectly qualified to teach digital forensics, right? Well, we're just moving into a time where we have formal education in things like information security and digital forensics. So it's a brave new world. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we're becoming more profession and how that's changing and some of the things that we probably need to leave behind and some of the things that we need to think about. So what's the difference between education and training? Well, training is basically the sort of hands-on stuff, Training in the past was things like you wanted to become a plumber, so you followed another plumber around until you figured out what you were doing, and then you credentialed as a plumber, right? Probably still to this day. I mean, there's no formal education to becoming a plumber. If you were a craftsman in the Middle Ages, if you were a cooper, made barrels, you learned it through an apprenticeship. And that's sort of where we are in information security. I think we're moving to a time where it's more about education. We're a young industry. The personal computer is roughly 30, 40 years old. I think I miscalculated that. Apple I, if you want to call that the first personal computer, is what, 1976? It's a little bit more than 30 years. We had the non-academic internet came to being, the internet that we can get on thanks to Microsoft and Windows 95. We finally get on this thing called the internet, this commercial internet, which sprung from military and the research community. So 1995, who was born in 1995? Anybody? Are you all as old as I am? I hope not. So, I mean, there's people who are old as the internet, but yet the internet is relatively new, right? First ShmooCon, first DEF CON 1993. First ShmooCon 2005. First DerbyCon, which seems like it's gone on forever, 2011. First Bsides in Asheville last year. We're a young community. And breaches get bigger. We suck. How many records have been lost? And this doesn't even include recent OPM, OMP, OPP. Okay, thank you. OPM hack or breach. I hate to use the word hack when we're talking about breaches. So that's a lot of records. Are we getting better or getting worse? A lot of people say we're getting worse. So we need to find a way forward. There was a lot of drama over the Sony Entertainment breach, and I think there still is. There are people who are getting paid a lot of money, I call it the cyber, industrial, and military complex, who is getting paid a lot of money to tell the government things that I don't know that are particularly things that U.S. government should be using to make foreign policies decisions on.
And then there are people inside the community who looked at the Sony breach and said, it's not North Korea. Mark Rogers is an example of that, and some other people. But we need to find a way forward. How do we become more mature as a profession? So education, the difference between training and education, training teaches you to do a specific thing, right? Education's a lifelong process. We have formalized education in the United States because, well, we pay taxes to have schools, right? We go through that, and then we go to universities and colleges that sort of teaches us how to do a job. But most of the time when you're done with a college degree, you're not going to go out and say, hey, I can do this job. What education does is it makes you trainable. And it exposes you to a world beyond just what you would do if you were learning through training. So how did you become a lawyer in the 19th century? Abraham Lincoln became a lawyer by reading books and following a lawyer around. He was an apprentice, right? Well, nowadays, Johnny Cochran went to law school. You didn't have to follow another lawyer around and read a bunch of books. So it became more formalized. How did you become a doctor in the 19th century? Well, another doctor told you how to use leeches and bleed people in order to make them better. Nowadays, we have formalized education. So if we're going to become a profession, we need to move from being self-taught, apprenticeships, and training to formal education. And this talks about some of the different things. I was talking about self-learning. I'm a self-taught hacker. I mean, I got an OSCP, which is training, but a lot of it thanks to the magic of Facebook. I can talk to a lot of really smart people out there, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, free resources. You can learn all kinds of really cool things about how to use different tools using YouTube. There's training out there we can take, offensive security, which I mentioned. The OSCP, even though it was the hardest thing I've ever done, and it wasn't cheap, it was the most rewarding thing I've ever done. I can't talk highly enough about it. Then we got Black Hat training. Black Hat DEF CON's coming up here in a couple weeks, where you can pay a lot of money to get some very good training. And then we have education. Like I said, it's lifelong learning, formal college level courses of study. Is anyone in here currently involved in InfoSec education? Are you students or professors? So what's the future? We're changing community, we're changing profession. We all want to be penetration testers because we want to be cyber ninjas and break into stuff and steal things. But InfoSec is more than just penetration testing. It's blue teaming. It's system administration. The easiest penetration test or easiest assessments that I've done have been misconfigured networks. You walk in with default passwords. Those sorts of things you're going to have to start baking. We need to bake security into our processes. Developers are part of the InfoSec community. As well as building tools, they also need to move toward more secure coding. Is anyone computer science background? Did you learn secure coding?
Nope. I did. Well, when I did the InfoSec master's degree.
Right, that's what I'm saying. We need to teach everyone secure coding.
Does have, like the computer science students did have to take an introduction to information security. Like by the time I graduated, everyone did. But it's one of those mile wide, inch deep classes where.
Well, I think that you should at least, my own personal opinion is if you don't learn secure coding in a university setting, you should learn it whenever you go to get a job. And it's just something that we need, this has to be a holistic approach. It can't just be penetration testers against network defenders. Most of the time when you show up for an assessment, they think you're there to get them fired in the first place. I've had some very interesting conversations with blue teamers where I show up to do an assessment who are basically sitting around sharpening up their resumes because they think I'm there to get them fired. And then you have to tell them, no, I'm here to help you. And usually it works out in the end. But we can't go around dropping O days and being cyber ninjas all the time. We have to be more well-rounded. And part of being more well-rounded is education, once again. We also need to set up standards. And I think the P-test is an excellent example of a standard, the penetration testing execution standard. So a bunch of luminaries in our field got together and said, these are the different things that compose a penetration test. Because there were people selling Nessus scans, charging tens of thousands of dollars as penetration tests. The P-test really sets up a standard, a formalized, codified standard that either people who are doing penetration testing or are buying penetration tests can go look at and say, this is what I'm buying or this is what I'm being sold. And this is basically the different steps. When I teach my classes and we talk about penetration testing, we use the P-test. We go through the entire P-test standard, we go through the technical guidelines, and we follow the steps of the P-test. All the way through, all the way from OSINT, open source intelligence, or pre-engagement interaction. We actually talk about how do you scope a penetration test? How do you charge for a penetration test? The P-test addresses all of that, all the way through reporting, which is the funnest part of a penetration test. How many people of you do you all know that are highly technical, could go around dropping O days on everything and its brother, but can't write a report? Or they can't talk to management about what their findings are, and this is, unfortunately, is a problem. So education seeks to make people, practitioners, more well-rounded, better communicators, because guess what? If you're getting a degree in InfoSec or a degree in digital forensics, you're going to have to take English classes, you're going to have to take public speaking classes, etc. So that's going to make you a more rounded person. It's beyond training. P-test is an emerging standard. I really hope that we adopt P-test formally inside the community. I believe PCI DSS actually looked at P-test and said, hey, you know, this is something we can use in setting up our standards. And it is suitable for an operational environment. This just isn't 10,000 foot overview. You can put this into practice. Accreditation processes. How do we accredit professionals? And I want to give Kevin Johnson a shout out. A lot of what I'm talking about today is based upon one of his talks, I believe, that I saw recorded at Bsides Orlando. And I am wearing the Professionally Evil lanyard as a shout out to Kevin Johnson. The CISSP isn't working. The CISSP is not a good measurement. We need more standardized, meaningful standards. This was written at 4 o'clock this morning. We have a lot of certifications, but how many of those are worthwhile beyond getting you beyond the HR filter? I mean, I think the OSCP is a good certification for people who are technical, but doesn't mean, well, you do have to write a report. But we need to move to a place where it's sort of a combination of CISSP and OSCP, right? Blended. It's both training and education. And those outcomes that result from training and education, where people are more well-rounded. You know, I know people, I've never taken the CISSP, I don't need it. I mean, I teach college. It's not really a requirement for my job. Neither was the OSCP, but we need to move from a time where technical and non-technical people can come together like the Coke commercial and sing in perfect harmony. So, education, formal security, information security education is really seeking to move toward that point. This is another thing Kevin Johnson alluded to, and I'm not sure how you fix this problem. Do we really want to license penetration testers?
You may need to for certain investigations and chain of custody.
Exactly. Exactly. Especially in the case of digital forensics, you're dealing with criminal activity. You may need, but what is there out there for, I mean, what is an example? Private investigator in some states, yes. There's also, yeah, okay. We don't have it in West Virginia at all. I'm just trying to think of what else was out there. The people who give the CEH has a, yeah, LPT, CFI. Yeah, so they've got a bunch of those certifications. You know, I think that really has to come from the governmental organization. You know, the problem really is we don't want to break the paradigm even more in order to fix the problem. So I don't have solutions. I'm asking the questions. And that's one that I don't know how we fix that problem. But you wouldn't hire an accountant that didn't pass accounts. Once again, I'm sorry. I'm going to stand in front of my misspellings. You wouldn't hire an accountant if he didn't pass the CPA exam, right? You're not going to hire a doctor that isn't licensed to practice in your state and pass all of the different medical practice. Yes, sir.
One of the things is your example, doctors and lawyers. Typically, the majority of the work that gets done in the doctor's office is being done by a physician's assistant.
Right.
Most of the work done in a law firm is being done by a paralegal.
That's true.
And so, could it be that the media is talking about how there's a requirement for a tremendous amount of personnel for the mobilization in information security, and yet if the solution is a 4 to 6 year program of licensure in order to get people in place,
that's a problem.
You're running way behind. And you know, to say that, for instance, I mean, if you're going to build a thousand foot skyscraper, you're going to need plumbers.
Right.
But you're also going to need laborers. You're going to need people that are going to be able to fit pipe and do those menial tasks. And
you can find those people now.
And that's not necessarily the thing that requires a 4 to 6 year degree.
Right. I understand. Let me say one thing. I use these as examples. We're not here now. This is what we should strive for the next 10 to 20 years in information security. To become a more mature, to become a more professional profession, we need to look at things like credentialing. And I think that these are examples, sort of really high level examples we can look at. The other thing you were talking about was how in law firms, most of the big work is done by paralegals, right? People who are a lot without professional licenses. You know, in the case of like QSAs, you know, if you're doing a PCI audit, if you hire an organization that has a QSA that can review your work, you're good to go. And that's another example, perhaps, of accrediting a profession. Maybe that's what we look at. We accredit organizations instead of individuals. But I don't have the answers. I'm just posing the question. I think this is where we need to be, you know, 20 years out. It can't happen today. It's not going to happen today. Cultural change takes a long time. I'm just trying to set up the question. I don't have all the answers either. Goodness knows I don't have all the answers. So I'm just trying to pose the question and sort of point to some solutions or a path forward. You got a question?
I actually do, because this is a little close to home. My fiance has a master's degree in psychology with counseling, and she's basically, because she moved states, for the last several years, she's stuck in this licensing hell, which is basically, you need not apply, you're not welcome here. And the job that you have to get the hours to become licensed is not available to you because you're not licensed.
Right.
And so I don't know that we actually want to create that same sort of situation in our industry.
Well,
because with law firms, certain types of law firms, let's say you do corporate law and things like that, you can come from another state. You can't practice individually. Like in South Carolina, you can't practice law individually unless you pass the bar. But if you're a corporate lawyer and you have passed the bar in another state, if you go to work for an entity, that entity has a right and has an authorization by the state to perform law. So therefore, you're under their kind of umbrella. And that kind of comes to the question earlier about that you had, how do you train everybody to go through 6 years? You don't. You find somebody who's going to be your lead forensics guy. You find somebody who's going to do each one of those tasks, and you make them specialists. I mean, when you go to a doctor and you have a general ailment, you send out a general assessor. It says, okay, this is your problem. That's what not a pen tester would do, but a general incident responder would do. And then they go back and say, okay, I need the wireless guys because this is a wireless intrusion. Or I need the guys who are going to do, analysis on the databases. It's the same basic principle. And then you could start credentialing each one of those individually, and it won't take 6 years. It'll go by much faster.
I think that's a good idea. And it sounds like the situation that your fiance is in is just a broken licensing system. And nobody wants to create a system that's broken. I think that's the reason we need to start the discussion now about how do we do this? Is it going to be, if the CISSP is going to be the gold standard, I think that we need to change that with the CISSP process. Is there any CISSPs in here before I know that I am offending people? Sorry. So who has a CEH? Any CEHs? So you know where I'm coming from, right? Any OSCPs? No OSCPs? I'm the only one. I'm the only survivor. So Security Plus, which is another one.
I have a master's degree in computer science with InfoSec as an emphasis, but...
Cool. Was that hands-on or was it theoretical?
I did the policy track. There was some hands-on, and it's a changing program. It was worthwhile. There's a few of these popping up around. Georgia Tech.
Yeah, very good program.
I went to James Madison when they were secure software.
Also a very good program.
They changed it again, but it was software security.
At Marshall, we have different tracks. We have a computer science department that teaches engineering. And then we have integrated science and technology, where we teach game development, application development, web development, digital forensics, and information assurance. That's really hands-on. So it's really what you want to get. Really what we need is a blend of the both of them. And you can do that in 4 years, but I think that, once again, we're talking about two different fiefdoms that are not really talking to each other. We need to talk to each other. So they put us all in the same building. We're in a new building on Marshall's campus. My hope is, since we have offices next to one another, we'll actually talk to each other. And we can move forward with maybe an InfoSec degree at Marshall, which we don't have right now. Does anyone have any questions before I go further on my rant? How much time do I have? Time? Dave Keene was so excited that he had these cards. So step one is education. I think that we've entered a time where you really need to have a degree to be an InfoSec professional. Step two is hands-on skills. Everyone, including your CSO, should have some ability to understand what Nmap is. I was in a meeting recently where two guys got in an argument because one of them said, "Wait a minute, I'm a CISSP, I know what a VPN is." Why? I mean, it's frustrating. And if you've ever dealt with a non-technical manager, we've got people who spent 20 years on the help desk in governmental organizations who are suddenly thrust into these roles of being leads or CISOs or whatever they are. And they have no technical skills, and you're trying to talk to them about making sound decisions, and they have no idea what you're talking about. That needs to change. I can tell from the reaction in the back of the room that you all have been there. I think we all have. So education is, and we need some sort of formal education, formal qualifications or credentialing, and we've talked about that. I think we started the conversation on that. Education is a lifelong learning process, and you need to keep your education current. How much do things change in InfoSec? All the time. So we already have certifications that require continuing education. This is true in other professions as well. Law. I worked for 20 years. We keep talking about lawyers. I worked for 20 years in a law firm, or actually different law firms. They have very strict continuing education requirements in order to continue to keep their professional license. I think that I talked about some of this before. I may have been repeating myself, but basically we need a blended approach. We need both education and training. Here's an example of the cultural divide inside of our community. We have suits versus hoodies, right? We've got people wearing the black hoodies are highly technical, and then you've got the non-technical people, the people that like to throw around the word cyber a lot. We need to come together as a community. We need to come together as a community, or we're going to have further breaches. We're going to have continued loss of data, and I don't know how much worse we can get. We keep hearing about cyber Pearl Harbor. When did it happen? Has it happened? Probably been happening the entire time. And for the love of God, quit using the word cyber before everything. I actually started a community on Facebook about to eradicate the word cyber. Now, I was trolling, but we can't put cyber in front of every word. I mean, cyber war is a thing. I actually teach a class on cyber warfare very happily. But you can't, you can't talk about cyber ninjas is not a thing.
What about cyber rock stars?
Cyber rock stars, not a thing. I mean, if you're talking to somebody in government, that's their word. That's what they use. That's their speak. But if we're talking to each other and someone starts saying cyber, 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 I'm going to look at you like, are you trying to blind me with your cybers? We've got it. My whole personal... Josh is looking at me funny back there. My whole personal thing on the word cyber is that we have words that succinctly describe what we do, which is protect information. Information security is perfectly good word. So to constantly throw this word around is confusing. It may be useful when talking to non-technical people because they've heard it before, but for the love of baby Jesus, quit using the word cyber all the time. Does anyone ever watch Congressional? Huh?
Can we talk about the word hacker then?
It's the same thing. I mean, I'm awful. I'm also on a program of basic rehabilitating the word hacker. So that's the first thing I ask in my classes is, what's a hacker? And I try to take whatever bad connotation they have and flip it on their head by the end of the semester. Because hackers the same way. I self-identify as a hacker, the good kind, not the bad kind. And that's part of this too is mass media have latched onto these words. So it's just not doing us a lot of favors. We need to stop the drama. Yes, we have these great resources of talking to each other, Facebook, Twitter, but we fight with each other way too much in public. There's a difference between what Marcus does, which is call out people when they're being stupid, or they don't agree with them, to fighting like children. We need to stop fighting like children. Doctors don't do it online.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. They do it in journals. They do it in online communities. They do it in WebMD comment threads. I apologize, but I'm going to take account with that. Doctors do it, accountants do it very quietly because they try not to destroy their business.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that if we want, we can, I'm all for lively debate. I don't think that we should, as professionals, be having a lot of these fights. I mean, I've gotten into a lot of drama because of my fights, my trolling of people and them trolling me back, and it got personal. Or we've had disagreements before, but should we really be talking about that openly in a community, or can we just take that one-to-one?
Bill, I think that's part, I understand exactly what you're saying and I agree, but I also think this is part of this being such a young industry.
Right.
I do think that we're all still trying to figure out things like, oh, gee, are we going to call ourselves InfoSec professionals? Okay, and why cyber?
That's not what I'm
All these
talking
little
about.
things. No,
Yeah,
but no, there's a lot of issues like that.
Right,
that
right.
We're all still struggling with and trying to
That's
decide
fine.
this is who we are. And trying to decide who you are is adolescent.
I agree.
Okay, so we're still in our adolescence. So I think you're going to see this kind of drama.
I think that's debate, that's not drama. I don't know if you've actually seen some of the drama that goes on. I think people get way too personal. They get into personal fights online, in public, and I think that that's not helpful. And what you usually have to do when it happens with me, and I got a big fight with somebody online one time. And then I realized I was being a jackass, so I stopped. But it's happened both to me on Facebook and on Twitter. I think there's a point where you take debates that have gotten personal offline, or you take it to someplace where it's not public. There's a lot of people, I mean, you almost have to operationalize the term drama. And then some people just don't care.
A drama usually starts out as a debate that becomes ad hominem.
Yeah, you're right.
Right, but I think that's where those of us that are doing this and have been doing this for years, we have to take that more of a mentorship role. First thing, we got to get rid of this. I'm a single hacker. I know everything because I never call I'm the best in the world. Right? And we all know plenty of people are like that. But I think secondhand, we have to, pull people aside and say, hey, like that's not appropriate. I think we have to police our own before we expect somebody else to police it. That's our first problem.
Yeah, I think that's true too. And I think once again, it is us being a young industry. But I don't know. I think it makes us look shallow and pedantic, and that's also true of a lot of people who are system administrators. You can't tell me something I don't know because I know everything. And unfortunately, some of those people move into our community and are just as bad here as they were. Foul language. I cuss, damn it, as much as anyone else. But when you're on Twitter and you're communicating, you don't go into a boardroom and say shit or stuff like, yeah, we raped you today in a pen test. To me, that's a problem, and that's a problem, suits versus hoodies. People come in, there's an element inside of our community is a little antisocial anyway. And it's just not productive to sound like, a high schooler when you go in and try to explain to people what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, or the findings of your penetration test. We need to do better talking to people inside and outside of our industry, including journalists. I know whenever I'm interviewed for a story, I try to be very succinct in what I'm trying to say. I don't use the word cyber. I try not to use the word hacker. I talk about online criminals. Act like an adult online, which kind of addresses the foul language and the drama aspect. You need to be well-rounded. Our profession will not move forward, and people will not take us seriously until we become better communicators or good communicators. And education is not training. Education produces better, well-rounded communicators. So that's my presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
Perhaps more comment in that I slightly disagree with your basic premise.
Okay.
If you're looking out at 10 to 20 years, I would question the viability of a separate InfoSec profession.
Okay.
In the way people look at it now.
Okay.
If you're still hiring pen testers and people like that, the computer industry has fundamentally failed.
Yeah.
If vendors are not building security in a meaningful way,
Right, you're right.
in 10 to 20 years, in ways that work with enough standards well enough that they can interoperate and you can collect logs and join them from a bunch of different things,
Right.
then it's just a losing proposition.
Yeah.
As an industry to come in and impose security on fundamentally insecure products,
Yeah.
is just not going to work.
Well, I don't think that I think that, security is guarding whatever makes a company money. So you're not really imposing as much as you're partnering with the business, operation of the business, so that you help them, you enable their business process. And that's really what I'm talking about here as far as communication being well-rounded, is you need to understand how to talk to different people, just not people who are technical. or people inside the community. And
But what we do today, what needs to be done today, which is working with the computing environment as it is.
yeah,
We have to work with what's there, not what we'd like to do.
all right, that's true.
But the next 15, 10, 20 year time frame you're talking about, I think we need to be a very different profession.
Okay, I agree, and I appreciate your comment. I mean, I don't know everything. Part of this is really starting a conversation. If you want to come on Reboot It, we can talk about this. That's cool. I think this is a conversation we need to have in public so that people understand. Yes.
I'm an information systems major at College of Charleston.
Yeah.
In Charleston, and how do we're just now starting to get into the security role
Right.
down there, and I helped with that by creating a cybersecurity club and gaining interest among our students. But
Yeah.
how do we bring the security education piece to our university?
Well, I think you're doing it right. I mean, here's the thing, is that not all InfoSec degrees are made equal.
Mm-hmm.
Some are way more technical, some are way more 10,000 foot overview. So you're doing the right thing, starting a club. Have you looked into doing CCDC?
Yes, so
Yeah.
actually we were the only South Carolina team to make it to the Southeastern.
Cool, congratulations. I still haven't won, with my team, we still haven't gone to regionals. Because my kids seem to be focused on the DFs and the attack side of it, and they're not defenders. So like one of the first things they did was lock themselves out by misconfiguring the firewall. So they were done in 5 minutes. You know, and I teach network protocols and network administration, so I'm sitting there going, okay, this is a teaching moment. So they got 2 weeks worth of how to configure a firewall. So you're doing the right things. The other thing you can do if you're involved in InfoSec education that you don't feel is technical enough, look at online resources. Part of being a hacker, good kind, is asking questions and finding the questions on your own, finding answers on your own, not waiting for people to tell you things. And when you become a practitioner, there's a lot of things you don't know. Google is your best friend, and so I would say do that. And then if I know students don't have a lot of money, I'm a big fan of offensive security training. But look for opportunities. DerbyCon has training. There was training here last night. Did you take the Python for information?
No, we didn't. I didn't get in.
Yeah,
Time.
but yeah, something like that. You can go to community events and get more technical hands-on training, etc. So I highly recommend it. Yes, sir. You have the hat.
Phil, what do you think about apprenticeships?
I think they're great because mentoring is very important. Mentoring in this community is very
Mentoring and apprenticeships are not the same thing.
important. Okay.
Mentoring is a relationship with somebody where you go to for an occasional piece of advice. You can even talk on a fairly regular basis.
Right.
Apprenticeship is where you work with the person and you learn by doing with that person.
Yeah,
they are
that's-
effectively your junior partner.
Yeah, that's part of the training piece, I think. We talked about apprenticeships before you came in here. We talked about
But I
apprenticeships.
mean, like, do you
But
think that
they're useful.
they're useful, but do you think that they also teach the communication skills?
No, I worry about that. I mean, it depends on the person who you're doing the apprenticeship with.
Good point.
And you know, in the case of formal education, you have to take classes which make sure you know how to write and speak in public. And I think that's the difference. But there is definitely, I mean, there's a plus to that. I wish I had an apprenticeship whenever I started out, or someone who knew the ropes. Does anyone else have any questions? I think I'm...
I have a response to the comment. We have internships on my team, a software engineering team, and we treat our internships as apprenticeships where they're taking tickets and working on items on our system, as well as doing communication items. They might be doing presentations.
Most companies don't treat their interns as anything
Yeah.
more than glorified coffee guys.
Yes, if you have an internship program questions, I'm going to talk to you about ours.
And we talked about Network Scout, which I did with 2 students. That was as much a mentorship as it was an apprenticeship because they taught themselves Python with my help. And then they did the project on their own based upon the skills we taught them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thank you, everybody.